Hello, and welcome to our special Groundhog edition of Talking with the Experts. I'm Mike Nichols, your host and AEM's content and social media manager. And today I've got Mark Hoeksema with me. He's AEM's chief meteorologist and head of meteorological services. And Mark and I think we're going to have a little bit of fun today. So I guessing most of our listeners in the U.S. are probably pretty familiar with Groundhog Day. But for our international audience, maybe you could give us a little bit of background.
Yeah, sure. Interestingly enough, I've been to Gobbler's Knob outside Puxatawny, and I've even pet the groundhog. I've seen him pulled out of the stump like you see on the movie Groundhog Day, and proclaimed what winter is going to be over the next 4 to 6 weeks, and then they put him back in the stump for another year. And it's always something that I think meteorologists, they're always like, I want to go to Puxatawny and see Phil come out. And so I've done that a couple times, and I really recommend it. It's kind of a little bit of Americana there when you go up there in
Could we call that the meteorological Mecca?
Yeah, you might. You might call it that. Sure. It's a lot of fun. Originally, I mean, you mentioned that it's very familiar here in the United States, but it actually it came from some cultures in Europe. Christians believe that a sunny Candlemas Day, which is February 2, signified 40 more days of winter could come. And even way back to the pagan era, they would observe ground-dwelling animals and see when they were coming out from hibernation, and that would give them some clue as to if the winter was going to continue long, maybe into spring, or if it was going to end a little earlier. And so over time, those kind of merged together. And then, with immigration and a lot of people coming from that part of the country, they brought over their cultures and their folklore. And so German settlers in Pennsylvania started having a festival around the Groundhog Day, and the formalization of it in Puxatawny wasn't until 1887, but that's a long time ago now. It's been going on every year, and it becomes a bigger and bigger spectacle. Other areas of the country want to jump on board, and there's other rodents and groundhogs that have been added to the list. Staten Island Chuck, Jimmy the Groundhog is in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. There's Potomac Phil in Washington, D.C., Dunkirk Dave in New York, New York. And then there's also Gary Groundhog in Toronto. So it's not just the U.S. And in 2004, Ukraine jumped on board with their own festival, and they have a groundhog, Babek Timko III. And they all do the similar things. They come out on the day and see if they've seen their shadow or not. And I heard this year that many of them did not see their shadow. So there was some consensus among groundhogs that winter, according to the rodents, is going to end early.
Okay. So, well, first of all, I live down the street from Woodstock, Illinois, so we like to refer to Puxatawny Phil as that other groundhog. But
yeah, Woodstock Willie.
Yeah, exactly. So, where Groundhog Day was filmed, right? So,
right.
Yes. So, so given the consensus, does that mean I get to go ahead and put my winter coat away now?
Well, if the groundhog sees his shadow, and you're going to get 6 more weeks of winter, but he didn't this year. So, he's telling us that maybe we won't need the coat as much when we hit March. But, we kind of all know that seasons can be kind of fickle. I wouldn't put the winter coat away yet, but I think you'll want to, keep it handy. And according to Phil, the next 4 weeks, you definitely want to keep it handy, because he's not saying we're going to get out of winter for at least 4 weeks.
Okay. Yeah, and so, I mean, how reliable is he? Is this something I should be listening to then?
No, I would not go on FanDuel and bet on Phil because he has some pretty poor record of calling the length of winter right. He's only been right 34% of the time. That's worse than a coin flip. Most people want better than a coin flip when they get to their forecast. So, it's a lot of fun for everyone to see what Phil's going to do and all the other groundhogs. But certainly I wouldn't plan my spring planting around Phil or anything like that.
All right, Mark. Well, I got to give you a hard time. So you're poo-pooing Phil, but you know what they say about meteorologists, right? That's the one profession where you can be wrong half the time and still have a job. So I mean, that's a joke, but if we talk seriously, right? Um, Phil doesn't have a great track record. How do meteorological predictions generally stack up against that?
Well, forecasts have improved greatly over the last 20, 30 years. I mean, it's really been incredible. Looking back at when I first got into doing the weather coming out of school, you couldn't get a forecast beyond 4 days. There was no such thing as a 7 day, no such thing as a 10 day, no such thing. I mean, those were dreams. But now you can get much longer forecasts. A 24-hour forecast is essentially 95% or better, which is excellent. I mean, you can pretty much bet on, if the forecast says if there's a chance of rain, that's, 70%, 80%, that's going to be pretty good. Temperatures and things like that. It goes down a little bit, toward, 80% or so as you go to 7 days. But still, really good and much better than the groundhog, that's for sure. After 7 days, sometimes they cannot be so great. And I think everybody kind of knows that when you look at a forecast that goes at 10 days, you take the day 8, 9, and 10 with a grain of salt, but that drops off toward, maybe closer to 50% by day 10. So, there's still accuracy in certain parts of those forecasts that people can plan on. If some forecasts out 14, 15 days can be in the extended range, can give you a hint on, is a cool snap going to last another 2 weeks? Or are we going to see a swing back to mild temperatures? It may not give you specific information on if it's going to snow on a certain day or how much sun will be on a certain day or what time thunderstorms will be. But there's certainly information within forecasts now. And a lot of that is just because the computers are just getting, every couple years the speed in computers doubles. And that allows us to run more complicated, accurate models, bring more data in, and do the number crunching that helps us get to, understanding and knowing what the weather is going to do much further out as we go forward in the years ahead.
So does that mean like on the foreseeable future, like we might be able to have 30-day forecasts that are telling me it's going to rain on the 28th of February or?
Well, I mean, what I would say about that is that I think you'll see the ability of forecasts to push, like doing a 30-day. I mean, there are 30-day outlooks, and they do the same thing as a 14 or 15-day outlook, where they'll talk about precipitation, where it could be above normal, where temperatures could be above normal. What you'll see is those will get more and more accurate. I don't think that in the next 5 years or so that you're going to see daily forecasts taking a shot at 30 days. I mean, there have been some entities that have tried to do that and failed miserably because at this time the atmosphere is so chaotic, and even with all the data that we put into it, there's still big data holes where we don't know where things are going on. And then so when we move stuff forward in our computer models, you don't know what's going on in a certain area, maybe over the Pacific Ocean, and then you don't have any information to progress forward. So, those are kind of things that I don't think a 30-day forecast will be here in maybe 5 years, but 10, 15 years, maybe that'll be possible.
Okay, that's fair. So we're talking about near-term forecasts. We're talking about, up to 10 15-day forecast. When it comes to like a seasonal outlook, like that's what Puxatawny Phil has given us, right? How do the meteorological predictions tend to stack up against that 34 to 40% accuracy rate that the Groundhog has?
Yeah, so we're taking a lot more data in than the Groundhog. The Groundhog is taking a one data point. I think it's his shadow. Um, we we are taking in a lot of data, and like we talked about earlier, a deterministic forecast saying it might rain tomorrow afternoon and get to 70 degrees. Um, those are possible in the near term, but when we get to seasonal outlooks, you begin taking in, you're looking at how the season might compare to an average season, meaning will certain areas of the country get more rain or snow, and how in certain years in the past with similar conditions did things happen. So, in the end, I would certainly say that the our forecasts do have value. They do have accuracy, and a lot of it has to do with the data we collect and the sciences and the computer models, climate models, and things like that. So certainly there's value there, and people should look to, but understand what seasonal forecasts are all about. They're not about telling you there'll be rain in 38 days. It's going to give you a little bit fuzzier information.
No, that's fair, Mark. That makes sense. So what exactly goes into developing a seasonal outlook?
Yeah, so
You
I've
mentioned it's
mentioned,
not the shadow, right? Not the shadow.
yeah, that's one thing we don't use,
Okay.
is the groundhog shadow. Sorry, Phil. Um, but what we do is we look at current weather patterns, current conditions around the globe, and we also then, in a nutshell, combine that with seasonal projections by climate models. Um, some people know some of these current weather patterns and conditions. I mean, most people hear about El Nino and La Nina. In some news form, they'll talk about maybe it being a stormy winter due to El Nino or things like that. So, those are the kind of that's water temperatures in the Pacific at various levels in the ocean. Um, we also there are some indices that are tracked about the Atlantic Ocean temperature on how the variations in temperatures look. That's called the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation. And then there's also water temperatures in the Pacific. There's a Pacific Decadal Oscillation that an index around the temperatures of water in the Gulf of Alaska, if there's a warm pool or a cool pool there. Um, and there are some other global indices that are looked at that take, that can be, for North America, we can have effects based on things happening over Southeast Asia. So, it's important to get all these different indices and patterns into an outlook, because all that's going to translate around the globe over the next 30 to 60 days. We also look at recent past data. So we're in an era of climate change. There are trends happening in certain parts of the globe, and that affects offsetting maybe some things where you'd say it would be colder or this or that, but that there's been some sort of warming trend the last 10 years. And then there are things we dive into called analog years. Analog years essentially means that we look for years in the past that had similar conditions to what we have right now, and then we take those years and see what happened later, 30 to 60 to 90 days later, and you can kind of assume that, given physics and the rotation of the Earth and all the physical things that are used in climate models and forecast models, are going to be the same whether it was now or 100 years ago. And so there's some assumption that certain things will happen again because we're in the same state of atmosphere and ocean going into the season. So you bring all these in. Some might be more important in one year than another. If there's a really strong El Nino or La Nina, that might be heavier weighted than analog years, things like that. But then we go in and we go, okay, so um, where will the where does all these patterns shake out to telling us where there'll be above normal temperatures or above normal rainfall, um, chances for more severe weather than normal, and we make a forecast. Essentially, it's called an outlook. When you go beyond about 10 days or so, you don't call a, a weather forecast a forecast. It's called an outlook. So there are seasonal outlooks, and you know, you could also go, well, if it's going to be drier here, what is the current drought state? So you can project that drought will worsen in areas, or it might get better, or fire danger might worsen in areas or get better. So you can take information about that, and maybe river levels are really high and it's going to be wet, and you can forecast that there'll be more lowland river flooding of croplands, and maybe delay in planting due to wet fields and things like that. So there are additional little steps you can do with a seasonal outlook that isn't just saying, oh, you're going to be warmer than normal, and we really can't tell you how much. Um, but a lot of those things in an outlook are actionable. There can be companies that they're going to hedge their bets on what sort of supplies they buy. Do they plan their planting in a different order where they're gonna push off something in a certain area and start it earlier in another area, or maybe it's a different crop because it's wetter or things like that. So there are things that can be done with that sort of stuff. Um, but it's a very unique forecast, fun, and anyone listening, if you live in the area and you can drive over there one cold morning in February in central Pennsylvania, I recommend it.
Great, Mark. This is really educational. It really is. And I didn't hear a single shadow figure in anywhere into your forecast, so that's great. Um, so we know Puxatawny Phil's spring outlook. Are we going to get yours?
Yeah, Mike. We are working on it now. We are diving into all those things I talked about. Um, the patterns that we look at are kind of formulating, which would give us a better idea as what we're going to roll into spring with. So some of it's done a little bit at the last minute, but there are indices being tracked, climate models we get constantly updated, and we actually have a webinar coming up. It's called Data-Driven Preparedness for Spring Weather, and it's a team effort with another company called Data Miner, and we are presenting our outlook in the first portion of the weather webinar. It's myself and two other meteorologists on my team that are going to be. We're doing the compilation of the data right now to see what we can tell people about things like spring severe weather, spring snow, spring flooding, temperature, obviously above and below normal. We're going to look at the drought situation on how it might develop early in the spring season, and also the fire weather projections. Fire weather season is generally not in the spring, but it sets itself up in the spring. So we're going to have really a lot of good content in that outlook.
Thank you, Mark. That's great. What we'll do is we'll throw a link to that registration page for the webinar. We'll throw that into the closing section of this video, and then we'll also, if anyone's viewing this on YouTube, we'll have a link in our video description. And if anyone's watching this on the social networks, we'll have a link in our comments and on the social network, so folks can find that webinar registration page. When is it again, Mark?
So it's Wednesday, February 28th, at 2 p.m. Eastern, which is
Great.
not the last day of February this year. So make a note. It's Wednesday, February 28th.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate you being here. I had a great time. I hope you did, learning more about Groundhog Day, and in the process, quite a bit more about the strengths, the limitations, the methods involved in a good scientific weather prediction. I hope all of you in our audience, I hope you enjoyed the conversation too. And until next time, this is Mike Nichols for AEM and for Talking with the Experts.